Innovative educators with Brooke Folgers. Find community, find strategies, find hope. My question for you today is, instead of telling your students information, can you have them discover something through art? If innovation is creating something new to deliver change, we have to start really getting serious about moving away from lectures. We also have to not just send kids off and say, figure it out, and call that project-based learning or discovering or whatever. We have to strategically guide kids in facilitating a learning experience. One of the best ways that I have found for helping kids discover information or discover the learning is through art. So today I'm going to unpack a few ways that you might do this in your classroom. What I share today can be used in any content area. You could do the activities that I discuss in English, in science, in history, in math, and connect it to your content area. The one thing that would change from content area to content area is what you are having kids discover through this art process, which I will give some examples of in a minute. There are a few key principles that I firmly believe in help to create great experiences with art as a method of discovery and learning for kids across many, many grade levels. The first is blank paper. Don't give kids lined paper. Don't give them grid paper. They need blank paper. Sometimes the bigger paper is even better. If you have access to 11 by 17 paper or chart paper or a roll of butcher paper for some of these activities, that would be a great option for kids. You can then also get into some collaborative art making amongst table groups or small groups of students. Second key thing with art as a form of discovery and learning: markers and crayons only. No sketching in pencil, no drawing in fine line colored pencil, no pen ink only drawings, markers and crayons. The reason for this is, first, that the drawing goes quicker. Kids don't sit there and draw a 1 inch by 1 inch super detailed thing. They go big, they go bold, they go colorful. It's just what happens with markers and crayons because of the size of the art implement. And I think it just brings out a kid in all of us. The third thing, a short amount of time. Kids do not need 45 minutes to draw some of the things that I'm describing today. These are brief. We want kids to put on paper immediately what comes to their head, immediately what they're seeing or thinking about in their head. We don't want them hyperfixated on planning or drafting. This is put marker to paper and draw something based on the prompt. Finally, and this is key, at some point our kids start judging art. I have not taught elementary, so I can't make any guesses to how young it is. I would guess very young. But kids start judging art. They judge their art, they judge each other's art, and as they get older, that judgment leads to them not willing to color, not willing to color outside of the lines, not willing to draw and have it be quote unquote bad. I'm a big believer that there is no bad art. All creativity is good. The act purely of creating is human. Our ancestors have been doing it since they painted on cave walls. And so we were made to make art. Therefore, we have to tell kids this is not about artistic skill. This is about doing learning in a different way. This is about creating. My expectation is you participate and engage. You may have to say that to kids a few times. So you have your blank paper, you have your markers or crayons, you're giving kids short amounts of time, and you're making sure to tell kids this is not about artistic skill. This is about learning in a different way. Let's get into the 3 activities that can be used in a variety of content areas with just slightly different framing to help kids discover and learn content. The first activity is to draw a house. When you say that to majority of kids, adults who grew up at any point in the US education system, there's a very specific thing that is drawn. It is a square with a triangle on top and a rectangle for a door and two windows with minor variations. What I am asking you to ask your students to do is ask them to simply draw a house. And when they say, "What else?" That's it. That's all you give them. Draw a house. Everyone does it. Maybe give them 7 to 10 minutes. Then kids can leave their papers on the table and you do a gallery walk so kids can see all their classmates' drawings and then facilitate a conversation. What do you notice about all of our drawings of a house? What do you think about that and what do you wonder? That's a thinking routine from Project Zero called See, Think, Wonder. I often use Notice, Think, Wonder, but those three questions can be used to spark some really, really rich conversation. Now, for how to apply this to content areas, I use this at the start of a novel unit in my language and literature class. We were going to be reading the book Little Fires Everywhere, which is a wonderful book that takes place in a very typical American suburb and just kind of calls into question the idea of family, the idea of perfectionism, some may say the American dream. And before we got into this book that was basically set in one house, I wanted kids to really start thinking about the implications of American suburbs. So I had them draw their house pictures and we walked around the room, we looked at them, and I strategically called on kids until we got to a point where after the gallery walk, someone said they noticed this doesn't look like my house. And I said, "Say more about that." And that launched a conversation about how we all kind of drew the same house, but my house doesn't look like that. And I know my friend's house doesn't look like that. And I live in an apartment and my cousin lives in a condo and none of them look like this. Kids' minds were blown. Eventually, one kid said, "I can't believe this is what they taught us in kindergarten." So we used drawing a house to unpack the idea of the American dream, what is home versus a house, and things of that nature. How you could use this in a different content area. Let's take history. The humanities are easy. We'll go to some other contents in a minute. History. Have kids read a text, listen to an audio, an oral history, and then have kids draw the house described. A few years ago, Rosa Parks' house was in the news a lot because it had been dismantled and then rebuilt as a interactive piece of art. So if you could find a narrative about an important historical figure's home or where they grew up or their setting and just ask kids, draw the house described, draw the building described, draw the setting described. Leave it at that. No further detail, even if kids ask for it, because what you don't want to do is to give direction. You want to see how kids are imagining it, what prior knowledge they are bringing to the table with whatever topic, place, location, concept you are talking about. So the less directions, the better. This should not prevent kids from doing the activity, but we are giving very simple instructions. Draw a house. Social studies, this also works great because if we're starting to ask kids to draw people, that gets a questionable very quickly, especially when we are talking about people with different identities, whether that be race or gender or sexual orientation. What we don't want is to facilitate an art experience where bias, prejudice, and inappropriate joking dominates. There will undoubtedly be some things that emerge, like with the house drawing for the language and literature unit. It kind of emerged that there was this predisposition to view some homes as better than others. And what groups and what people had perpetuated that idea was pretty obvious to my diverse class. But drawing a house, drawing the setting, draw this location, you can even say no people. You are just drawing this thing. It's a great entry activity to conversation. Last content area for Draw a House before we go on to the next activity, math. You could have kids draw their house, and then even if their lines aren't straight, they use a ruler, make straight lines, build their house out of shapes, find the area, find the perimeter, find the length of different sides. How many different ways can you build your house out of different shapes? Connect it to math. Brings the concept home of area, perimeter, whatever the thing is. I'm not a math teacher at all, so please don't check me on this. I know this works, but don't check my math terms. But allowing kids to draw first and then having them do the learning, do the content, whatever that is, with their piece of art elevates your learning experience to something different because they are doing the learning through their own eyes, through their own piece of art, through their own understanding of the thing. And all the things I described are not so high stakes that if you did this and kids had a variety of different concepts and artwork that you would ruin your curriculum or ruin kids' ability to succeed. What does ruin learning and kids' ability to succeed is a lack of interest and feeling disconnected from learning. So draw a house with your kids. Second idea, draw your community. This is a design practice used all over the world. I've used this in East Africa when working with communities. I had the learners draw their community so we could talk about different areas where they feel safe, where they don't, to identify stakeholders, and different projects that the kids would be interested in doing in their community. So if you have any type of community service learning in your educational context, that would be one way to use Draw Your Community. It is as simple as it sounds. You ask kids to draw their community, the places they're going regularly. It will probably be school, home, a sport, a store. But what you really want to ask is for them to draw in some other details, not just the places that they go to a lot. But maybe, well, every time I go to soccer, I drive past this McDonald's and I think about the time when I was there and this thing happened. Have kids draw their community, put them in groups to do it. You can put some parameters even for this one of you have to have at least 6 locations. But whatever it is, you're having kids map out their world. This could be used in social studies to discover redlining. This could be used in science to talk about green space availability. The last idea for bringing in art, bringing in drawing to the classroom to help kids discover content and learn is having kids draw the future. There's a wonderful activity from the Stanford D School, which I will link in the show notes, called Portrait of a Descendant. The activity I will link is definitely tailored for adults, but the main principles and practice is to envision decades into the future and envision a descendant. What does that descendant look like? What do they sound like? What do they value? This is a higher level type of art. This gets at some deep concepts that we have. But in the world we are in, with children watching the world as it is, we have to start trying to find ways to generate hope for our students. And if we can start helping them envision a future, first, that exists, and second, that they want to be part of, That is how we can start to build hope and then therefore action, advocacy, and change makers. Change makers do not create change unless they have hope for the future. So having students guiding them through something very similar to again, this portrait of a descendant activity would be a great way to talk about, frankly, innovation, to talk about design, to talk about problem solving. Maybe in science class, you frame it as in the context of climate. How do we envision our descendants interacting with the climate? And it cannot just be everything's dead. Have to have something. This one, each level of art that I've provided in this episode maybe has a little more guidance or parameters. Again, we do not want to stifle kids' creativity, but we also want to make sure that we are getting the content out of kids to facilitate the learning we need. And it is our job as teachers to be strategic facilitators of this learning. So maybe in science, it's drawing the future. How have we addressed climate change? Maybe in art, it is depicting what media looks like, what advertising looks like, what social justice posters look like. There's a variety of ways we can envision the future within our content areas. With these three ideas of bringing art into your classroom to help kids discover and learn, you have to be willing to converse with kids. And you have to trust that when you get out of the way, kids will get where you need them to go. Kids are inherently creative. The younger they are, the better, frankly. Kids want to believe in something bigger and better for their lives. And kids love to color. And what you don't want to do is hijack the art and have a result of a kid looks at their piece of art and says, I did it wrong. No. We facilitate conversations. We lean into what do you notice, think, wonder, and questions like, can you say more about that? Or what makes you think that? Use only those 5 questions next time you do a art activity with your kids and see where you get. You will likely be surprised at the level of depth and complexity that kids are able to share when they do not feel they are trying to search for the perfect right answer to spit back to you. The final component of this that is highly important is displaying the art on the walls. When I did the house drawing activity, I put everyone's houses up. We had like 80 pictures of houses on the wall. And it really anchored our discussion in the book Little Fires Everywhere. If it's a poster, hang the posters up. If it's some overlapping of posters, if you have to stack them and rotate them out, whatever works. But when kids see their art on the wall, it further emphasizes they belong here and their perspective matters here. So next time you're in need of some innovation, get out the markers and the paper. It doesn't have to be fancy. If you are in a resource-limited setting, Goodwill has markers and crayons all the time. I would encourage you to check out platforms like Donors Choose. You would be surprised at how many random people may contribute to a simple ask for markers and paper. Allow kids to make art and allow kids to talk about the art and see what happens in your class. If you have some ideas after today's episode, make sure to follow the show so you don't miss what's next. Leaving a quick review really helps us reach more innovative educators. Join us next Tuesday.